In the vast scale of World War II, the names that dominate history books are often the pilots, commanders, and political leaders whose decisions and actions shaped the fate of nations. But this story begins far from the battlefield. Inside a dimly lit maintenance hangar on a windswept airfield in 1943, while bombers roared overhead and squadrons prepared for missions that would change the course of the war, one man worked quietly in the shadows, uncelebrated and entirely invisible to the outside world. His name was Corporal Thomas "Tom" Holden, a modest aircraft mechanic stationed at RAF Birchwood, a relatively small but strategically vital airfield supporting Allied bombing runs deep into occupied Europe. Tom was not an officer. He did not command troops. He did not fly. Instead, he spent his days and, more often, his nights surrounded by tools, steel panels, engine parts, and the smell of oil and burnt rubber. His job was simple in description, but monumental in importance. Keep the planes flying. Men like Tom rarely enter history books, yet they were the silent backbone of the Allied air war. Pilots trusted their lives to them. Missions succeeded or failed because of them. But this particular mechanic would, through a chain of events that almost no one noticed at the time, prevent a catastrophe so large that historians today estimate it would have taken the lives of nearly 6 Allied airmen in a single week. The incident did not occur in a blaze of gunfire or a dramatic air battle. It happened in a place far more mundane, the yellow-lit maintenance bay, where Tom performed routine inspections. But war does not always announce its dangers loudly. Sometimes danger hides quietly, tucked beneath bolts, rivets, and engine housings, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. On an otherwise ordinary evening in March 1943, as the last rays of daylight slipped behind the hangar doors, Tom was performing a scheduled inspection on a B-24 Liberator, one of the many heavy bombers that cycled through the airfield daily. He had done this hundreds of times before, repeating motions so familiar that they had become instinctive. But as he crouched under the left wing and ran his fingers along the hydraulic lines, he felt something unusual, something that didn't belong. It was a tiny detail, barely visible, and easy for any mechanic to overlook, a faint, irregular vibration in one of the fuel pressure lines leading to engine 2. At first, he assumed it was fatigue. After all, he'd been awake for nearly 16 hours. The hangar hummed with the fading sounds of other mechanics packing up. His tools rattled faintly with every movement. Vibrations were normal, but something about this one barely detectable, almost ghost-like, didn't sit right with him. He returned the next morning and checked again. Same vibration, slight but present. He reviewed the aircraft logs. No notes. No reported issues on previous flights. No unusual readings from the gauges. The bomber had flown 3 successful missions without any sign of trouble. Still, Tom felt an unease he couldn't explain. Mechanics sometimes describe this as the whisper, the sense that a plane is trying to tell you something before the instruments do. Whether it was experience, intuition, or something deeper, Tom decided he needed to investigate further. He removed the surrounding paneling, inspected the line, and studied the fuel pressure regulator. Everything looked normal. No cracks, no leaks, no discoloration, no strain marks. He considered dropping it. There was no protocol for grounding a plane over a feeling, but he didn't drop it. Something urged him to push further, even though he couldn't justify it on paper. What Tom didn't know, what no one knew, was that this small anomaly was the first visible sign of a manufacturing defect that, undetected across dozens of bombers, was slowly working its way toward catastrophic failure. If even one bomber failed over occupied territory, it would have been a tragedy. But if all the bombers with this defect failed under stress at altitude during the next major mission, it would become one of the most devastating mass aircraft losses of the war. And only one man working in silence had found the faintest clue. This is the true beginning of the unseen story. Tom Holden wasn't the sort of mechanic who acted impulsively. He was methodical, calm, and deliberate, the kind of person pilots trusted instinctively. That trust wasn't built through rank or authority. It came from consistency. Every aircraft he touched returned in better condition than it arrived. Every pilot who flew a plane he serviced knew they were in safe hands. So the idea of grounding an aircraft, especially one scheduled for an upcoming mission, was not something he took lightly. Grounding meant delays. Delays meant reduced mission strength, and reduced mission strength meant more casualties elsewhere. It was a chain of responsibility he took seriously. Still, the vibration gnawed at him. He sought out Sergeant William Larkin, the senior mechanic on duty. Larkin was a man with broad shoulders, streaks of gray in his hair, and a no-nonsense attitude sharpened by years in the Royal Air Force. Tom respected him immensely. "Larkin," he began carefully, "I'm getting a strange vibration in the port-side fuel pressure line of the Liberator. It's faint, but it's consistent." Larkin raised an eyebrow. "You sure it isn't the mounts? Those bolts have been loosening lately." "Checked them. The regulator. Clean. The pump. Perfect pressure." Larkin frowned, clearly unconvinced. "Then what are you saying, Heldon? You want to ground a bomber over a ghost vibration?" Tom hesitated. "I'm saying something isn't right." Larkin sighed, rubbing a hand across his stubbled jaw. "You know we've got 12 bombers going up this week. Command's breathing down our necks." "I know," Tom replied quietly. "But if we ignore this, we could be missing something big." Larkin stared at him for several long seconds. He respected Tom's judgment, but mechanics didn't have the luxury of chasing every hunch. War demanded speed as much as precision. "All right," Larkin said finally. "Document it. Strip the line. Let's see what we find." For the next several hours, the two men worked side by side, removing the entire fuel line assembly from the wing root to the engine block. They expected to find a microcrack, or maybe some debris, but nothing was visibly wrong. It was pristine. They checked torque. They checked alignment. They checked the dampeners, the clamps, the welds, all perfect. Every measurement matched the manuals. Larkin exhaled in frustration. If we send this to the CO, he's going to send us straight back here with orders to reinstall and move on." Tom looked up at him. "But you feel it too now, don't you?" Larkin paused. "Yeah, I do." It wasn't just a hunch anymore. Both men had felt it, but without physical evidence, they had no authority to ground the aircraft. Tom refused to give up. "What if it's upstream? We could check the manifold." "It's not protocol," Larkin warned. "Neither is ignoring it." Reluctantly, Larkin agreed. They removed the manifold, something that usually required a formal order. And there, for the first time, they found something. A faint metallic residue inside the coupling, barely visible. Something that looked like fine silver dust. Tom collected a sample with a cloth. The dust was smooth, almost polished. Not corrosion, not dirt, not aluminum wear. Larkin's eyes narrowed. This isn't right. Tom checked the other bombers in the hangar, 5 of them that were lined up for servicing. 3 had the same residue, and 2 had something worse. Minuscule filings lodged near the pressure junction. If those filings enter the pump during high-altitude strain, they could seize the fuel flow. An engine failure over the channel might be manageable, but over Germany under fire, with full payload, was almost certainly fatal. Tom inhaled sharply. "Larkin, this isn't an isolated issue. This might be a batch defect." Larkin swallowed hard. "How many planes got these parts?" Tom flipped through the procurement log. 37 planes, nearly half the squadron, all scheduled to fly the next massive bombing run. Larkin's face drained of color. "If this is what I think it is, these birds are flying with a time bomb strapped to their wings." Tom nodded. "And they have no idea." This was no longer a minor maintenance concern. It was a potential disaster. A disaster waiting to unfold in the skies, and the clock was ticking. By the time Tom and Sergeant Larkin finished documenting the metallic residue in the manifold couplings, night had settled across the airfield. A cold wind blew through the cracks of the hangar doors, carrying the distant rumble of aircraft engines preparing for the dawn's scheduled operations. Pilots were already reviewing maps. Navigators checked their instruments. Gunners loaded belts of ammunition. Everything was moving forward as if nothing were wrong. Yet Tom knew something was terribly wrong, catastrophically wrong. They approached Flight Lieutenant Harris, the officer overseeing aircraft readiness. Harris was a strict, no-nonsense administrator who relied heavily on procedural reports. He was not known for patience, especially with mechanics who brought theoretical problems. He stood with his clipboard, reviewing mission rosters. "Lieutenant," Larkin called out, "we need a moment." Harris glanced up. "Make it quick. We have a tight schedule." Larkin exchanged a look with Tom, then said it plainly. "We need to ground the 37 Liberators that received parts from Batch 77C. Harris blinked, then frowned. "Ground them. Are you out of your minds? That's half the strike group." Tom stepped forward. "Sir, we've identified a manufacturing defect in the pressure line assembly. It's depositing microfilings into the fuel junction. If the lines seize at altitude, that's speculation." Harris snapped. "No, sir," Tom said calmly. "It's physics." Harris folded his arms. "And what visible damage have you found?" Tom hesitated. "None." "But no damage," Harris repeated. "No leaks, no discoloration, no failed tests." "Not yet," Tom emphasized. "But the filings are real. They're inside the lines. If the pump draws them in during strain, the engine will lose fuel pressure." Harris exhaled sharply. "Even if this defect exists, if protocol demands a formal engineering review and confirmation from Supply Command, that takes days. We launch in 8 hours. Tom's jaw tightened. "Sir, with respect, if these planes fly, many won't come home." Harris shook his head. "This is wartime, Corporal. We cannot cripple an entire bombing operation over a handful of invisible filings." Larkin attempted again. Sir Harris cut him off. "You have your orders. Reinstall the assemblies. Clear the aircraft for takeoff." He walked away without another word. Tom stood motionless, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. Larkin muttered, "Damn bureaucrats. They only listen after something explodes." But Tom wouldn't give up. He returned to the hangar, opened the logbooks, and began reviewing every aircraft fitted with the suspect part. There had been no engine failures yet, but 2 pilots had reported brief drops in pressure that were attributed to turbulence. Another reported slight engine jitter, but dismissed it as winter air. These weren't enough to convince the officers. But to Tom, they were pieces of a puzzle. He needed more evidence, something undeniable. By 2 a.m., Tom and Larkin had dismantled 2 more assemblies from grounded test aircraft. Both contained the same metal residue. But more importantly, Tom noticed something else. The residue wasn't uniform. The filings were slightly different sizes. That meant breakdown was accelerating over time. Each flight made the defect worse. That changed everything. At 3:10 a.m., Tom sprinted across the tarmac to the radio hut, where Squadron Leader Peterson was coordinating flight briefings. Peterson was older, stern but fair, and had been a bomber pilot himself before a back injury forced him out of the cockpit. He looked up as Tom entered, breathless. "Corporal, this better be important." Tom spread the samples on Peterson's desk cloth, swatches dotted with metallic dust, magnified drawings, pressure readings, and notes from multiple inspections. Peterson examined the filings with the scrutinizing eye of a man who had once trusted his life to engines. "So, if these get sucked into the fuel pump, what happens?" Tom answered quietly, "The engine dies, sir. No recovery. Instant flame out. Put and at altitude. Catastrophic," Tom said. Peterson leaned back, expression darkening. "How many birds?" 37. Peterson closed his eyes. "Bloody hell." He stood sharply. "Get Larkin. Bring everything you've got. I'll wake the wing commander." This was the shift Tom needed. A leader with enough authority, enough respect for reality, to act. An emergency meeting was called at 4:00 a.m. Officers gathered in a cold operations room. Tom stood before them, exhausted but resolute. He explained the defect, demonstrated the filings, and showed the mounting evidence of progressive wear. For a long moment no one spoke. Finally, the wing commander nodded. "Ground the affected aircraft immediately," Harris protested. "Sir, that will gut the mission strength." The wing commander cut him off. "Better to delay a mission than send 600 men to their deaths." The order was given. The nightmare had been averted, or so they thought. But fate wasn't done with them yet. Grounding the aircraft was only the beginning. The next step was proving beyond doubt that the defect was real. If the manufacturing flaw affected other squadrons, and Tom suspected it did, the Allied command needed irrefutable evidence. The wing commander ordered a controlled test flight using one of the affected aircraft, fitted with monitoring equipment and a safety-tethered system allowing emergency shutdowns. Tom volunteered to be on board. The officers immediately refused. "Absolutely not," Peterson said. "You're a mechanic, not aircrew." Tom's response was calm but firm. "Sir, with respect, I understand the defect better than anyone. If something goes wrong up there, you'll want the man who knows where to look." There was silence. Then Peterson nodded. "Very well. You're on the crew." Dawn broke with an icy pale light as the test Liberator rolled onto the runway. The bomber's engines roared to life, rattling the frost-covered ground. The flight crew performed final checks. Tom sat behind the engineers, tools strapped down, gauges ready. Peterson stood outside with binoculars as the plane lifted into the sky. The first 30 minutes were uneventful. Fuel pressure held steady. Vibration was barely measurable. Altitude climbed to 18,000 feet over the North Sea. The crew performed coordinated stress tests, rapid throttle changes, banking maneuvers, simulated combat dives. Still nothing. Tom felt doubt creeping in. Was he wrong? Was he about to become the mechanic who grounded 36 aircraft for no reason? Then, 42 minutes into the flight, it happened. A sudden, sharp spike in fuel pressure. A tremor in engine 2. A warning light flickered. "Pressure drop," the engineer shouted. Tom lunged forward. "Reduce throttle. Reroute flow. Now." The pilots reacted instantly. The bomber shuddered as pressure fluctuated unpredictably. Another spike. Then a jolt so violent it shook Tom's tools off their trays. Engine 2 screamed a metallic shriek that no healthy engine ever made. Tom yelled, "Shut it down! Shut it down!" The pilot cut fuel flows. The engine coughed, then died. Silence on that side of the aircraft. The crew exchanged grim looks. The defect was real, and it was lethal. The bomber limped back toward base on 3 engines, descending slowly across gray morning clouds. When they landed, the ground crew swarmed the aircraft. Tom rushed to the wing. Removing the coupling revealed the truth. The defect had worsened drastically in just 1 hour. The filings had accumulated, ground into the metal interior, and caused catastrophic degradation. Peterson studied the damaged part, shaking his head in disbelief. This would have taken out every plane fitted with this assembly. Tom's voice was quiet. "Yes, sir." Word spread quickly across the base. The mission was postponed. Replacement parts were ordered. Engineers from the manufacturing plant were summoned. Inspection teams were dispatched to other airfields. Tom Holden had not only saved his own squadron, He had prevented a chain reaction that could have caused one of the worst mass aircraft losses of the war. But Tom didn't celebrate. He simply returned to the hangar, cleaned his tools, and prepared for the next aircraft. Because in war, there was always another mission, another danger, another unseen problem waiting in the shadows. And Tom had never been one for applause. The moment the defective assembly was confirmed, higher command reacted with urgency and fear. Losing multiple bombers to a manufacturing flaw would be an embarrassment. Losing 37 in a single operation would be a scandal. Word of such an event could cripple morale, spark political backlash, or worse, encourage enemy forces. And so, even as teams arrived to inspect the defective parts, a message swept silently through command headquarters. This issue does not leave the base. Representatives from the manufacturing plant arrived within 24 hours. They were not soldiers. They were corporate engineers and executives, wearing crisp suits and expressions of panic. The atmosphere in the hangar shifted from military efficiency to tense corporate damage control. Tom found himself being questioned repeatedly. How did you first detect this vibration? Why did you decide to dismantle the assembly? Did anyone instruct you to do this? Do you have a technical background in metallurgy? Tom answered calmly, but Larkin bristled at their tone. Finally, he snapped, are you questioning his discovery or trying to cover your own backsides? The lead inspector stiffened. We are determining procedural compliance. Peterson leaned in, voice low and steely. Procedural compliance would have killed 600 of my men. Silence fell. The investigation confirmed the cause. An improperly machined valve seat in the pressure regulator assembly. 8 tiny manufacturing shortcut shaving fractions of a millimeter off metal to meet production. Quotas had caused a vibration that slowly ground the component from the inside. It was a time bomb disguised as a perfectly functional part, and the defect had gone completely unnoticed in the factory's quality control. The revelation sent shockwaves through the chain of command, but the danger wasn't over. Engineers realized that similar assemblies had already been shipped to 4 additional airfields across England. If Tom hadn't found the defect, the Allied forces could have lost nearly 200 bombers in a matter of weeks. The scale of the potential disaster was staggering. Yet the official report, drafted quietly behind closed doors, would say, routine inspection revealed potential wherein fuel assemblies. Aircraft grounded as precaution. No mention of the defect's scale. No mention of the near-mass casualty event. And certainly no mention of the mechanic who caught it. Tom didn't mind. He wasn't seeking recognition, but others did. Peterson confronted the base commander. You're rewriting the report. Why? The commander replied evenly. Because the last thing we need is panic among our men or political chaos in London. Peterson's jaw clenched, and Holden, he deserves commendation. He will get a note in his file, the commander said. A note, Peterson growled. He saved hundreds of lives. The commander lowered his voice. He saved the war from a scandal. That is why he gets a note. But Peterson had no intention of letting Tom be buried in bureaucracy. He sought out Tom personally. "You saved more lives than anyone will ever understand," he said quietly. "I want you to know that whether or not command chooses to recognize it." Tom nodded humbly. "I just did what anyone would have done." Peterson shook his head. "No, most would have ignored it, or been too afraid to push back. You insisted. You made them listen." The investigation ended after 3 days. The plant issued replacements. The defect batch was recalled from all bases. Disaster had been averted. Yet, outside a small circle of men, no one would ever know. That's the cursed, the quiet honor of unseen war stories. 1 week later, the postponed mission was rescheduled. The bombers, now fitted with corrected assemblies, lined the tarmac once more. The men climbed aboard with the same mix of fear and determination that accompanied every major operation. Engines growled. Propellers blurred into motion. The airfield trembled beneath the weight of metal and purpose. Tom was back in the hangar, tightening bolts, checking couplings, and listening for vibrations no one else could hear. As the squadron lifted off, Peterson approached him quietly. "You know," he said, "if those planes return safely today, it's because of you." Tom kept his eyes on the sky. "It's because the crews are skilled, and the machines are sound." Peterson smiled. "The machines are sound because of you." Tom didn't respond. He simply watched until the bombers disappeared into the horizon. Hours later, the radio crackled. "Strike group returning. Minor losses. Primary targets achieved." Only 2 aircraft were lost during the mission, tragic, but expected in wartime. None were lost to engine failure. None. As the surviving bombers descended, one after another, Tom felt an unexpected sensation, not pride exactly, but a deep, steady satisfaction. The hangar crews welcomed the returning men with weary relief. Pilots, unaware of how close they had come to catastrophe, joked about flak bursts and faulty radios. One of them, Lieutenant Dawson, strolled over to Tom with a grin. "Halden, you're a wizard with these machines. Smoothest ride we've had in weeks." Tom smiled faintly. "Just doing my job, sir." Dawson clapped him on the shoulder and walked away. But Peterson stayed behind. "You could have demanded recognition," he said. "You could be on a medal list right now." Tom shook his head. "Sir, medals don't keep men alive. Care does." Peterson nodded slowly, understanding the depth of the statement. But the story didn't end there. 3 months later, during a routine review, the Air Ministry uncovered a startling fact. Tom Holden had personally reported more potential safety issues than any mechanic in the entire regional command. His error rate was 0. His detection accuracy was unmatched. He wasn't just thorough. He had an extraordinary intuition for mechanical systems and ability to sense problems before they materialized. A gift that defied explanation. Some called it instinct. Some called it experience. Tom believed it was simply attention-focused, relentless attention to the lives depending on his hands. By summer of 1943, the Air Ministry quietly assigned him to help inspect aircraft at nearby bases. His unofficial role, preventing disasters before they happened. But he never forgot those tiny metal filings. He never forgot the test flight. And he never forgot that the greatest dangers in war often hide in silence. After the war, the world moved on with astonishing speed. Airfields shut down, hangars emptied, bombers were scrapped, sold, or converted. People married, had families, and rebuilt their nations. The stories of the war shifted from survival to nostalgia, then to history books. Tom Holden returned home, taking a quiet job repairing farm machinery. He never spoke publicly about the defect he discovered. He never mentioned the test flight. He never told anyone how close an entire squadron came to annihilation. He simply lived. The official records from the base remained sealed for decades, not out of malice, but because wartime bureaucracy favored results over storytelling. And so Tom's actions were recorded as routine inspection intervention. Mechanic demonstrated diligence. That was the entire recognition for preventing a mass fatality event. Years later, when Peterson was interviewed for an oral history project, he was asked about the men who impressed him most. He didn't mention officers. He didn't mention heroes with medals. He didn't even mention pilots. He mentioned Tom. People think wars are won by those who pull the trigger, Peterson said softly. But sometimes wars are saved by someone tightening a bolt, by someone who refuses to ignore a whisper of danger. Only then did the interviewer look into Tom's service record, puzzled by the lack of detail. The story remained fragmented, buried under layers of sealed files. But fate had one final act in store. In the early 2000s, a historian researching wartime manufacturing defects stumbled upon a brief, cryptic note about a recalled batch of pressure assemblies that had nearly caused catastrophic losses. The documentation was vague, but one detail stood out. An enlisted aircraft mechanic identified the risk prior to mission deployment. The historian tracked down the surviving veterans of RAF Birchwood. Many were gone, but some remembered the quiet mechanic who seemed to hear problems no one else noticed. One said, "If Tom told you something was wrong with your plane, you believed him. No questions." Another said, "He saved my life. I just didn't know how at the time, piece by piece." The historian reconstructed the narrative, the defect, the filings, the test flight, the grounding of the bombers. The story was published in a small military history journal. It gained little attention. But one day, a young airman in training found the article and asked his instructor, "Sir, how could one mechanic make such a difference?" The instructor replied, "Because in war, survival depends on the men who see what others overlook. That's the lesson. That's the legacy." Tom Holden died peacefully at age 87. Never knowing that his story once buried was slowly emerging into the light. He never sought recognition. He only wanted the planes to fly safely. But today, his name is studied quietly in a handful of aviation courses, not as a hero in the traditional sense, but as something just as important. A reminder that unseen acts of diligence save lives in ways the world may never fully understand.